Welcome to your video representation video tutorial on the ramp up and the ramp down. The ramp up and ramp down are not technically pieces of your video production per se. They're elements that are placeholders and buffers and information segments that will help, for example, the engineer at a TV station to queue up your program properly, to fit it into a broader programming schedule, to not lose it among the other bits and pieces of programming that he or she has to deal with, and to help tune the color and sound so that it looks in sound in broadcast the way that you intend it to. It's also very helpful information for organizing all the various movies I need to deal with in the class. So we include them at the beginning and the end, and I've included a small slide here to remind you of what goes into the ramp up and the ramp down. It's quite easy, and I'll walk you through each step. The ramp up includes a 10-second slug of black, then a 10-second bars and tone of NTSC variety, a 10-second slate, and I'll show you what information goes into that slate, another 10-second slug of black, and then a dissolve into your first shot. FFB stands for fade from black. That's how nearly all programming begins, unless there's a reason to begin in a different way. It's one of the customs that cues us that the start of a program is happening. The ramp down is even more simple. It comes at the end of the program. It starts with a fade from black, that is a dissolve out of the last shot into black and into this 10-second slug. And that's it. Most of these things you already know how to do, but let me walk you through some of the less common ones. None of them is terribly complicated. We'll start here in our timeline, and we know that the ramp up needs to begin at the beginning of the movie that I've produced, which I have right here. If you remember, there's a simple way to get clips into the start of the video, and we want to have our playhead located at the very beginning of our clip. I'll do this by pushing the up arrow until I get all the way back to the beginning. If I push the down arrow, it jumps to the next edit, but if I push the up arrow, the playhead goes all the way back to the start. The first thing we need is a black slug. We find that here in the Effects tab under Video Generators, Slug. And I'll double click the slug to have a look. Up here in the viewer we can see that the default slug time is 2 minutes. Well, we only need 10 seconds of slug. So I'm going to enter 1000, 10 seconds and 0 frames into that slug duration. Then I'm going to grab the slug and drag it over here to the canvas. And you remember that this is the canvas insert technique. And if I go to insert, it will insert the slug at the point where the playhead is now. I will go to insert, drop, and voila, we have a slug placed just where we want it, right here, with no gaps. I'm going to right click and double check the duration. Indeed, it's 10 seconds. Exactly what we want. I'm just going to leave the playhead here because I can use that canvas drop technique for the other pieces as well. The next thing we need is a bars and tone. The bars and tone is also here in the Effects tab. I will click bars and tone and go down to bars and tone NTSC. NTSC is the broadcast standard for American and many other locales for broadcast parameters, let's say. I can double click that and you can see it here in the viewer what that looks like, and if I play a piece, you'll hear that there's a tone that accompanies it. Again, we want a 10-second duration. We're preset to 10 seconds, so I will simply drag to the canvas, insert, and the bars and tone are inserted. The next thing we need is a slate, and we prepare the slate in the Boris editor under Video Generators. Get bars and tone in the way. Boris and Title 3D. Quite easy. You've done a bit of this and you know how that works. I'm going to skip walking you through those steps and just cut to a pre-made slate that I have here saved already. I call it Project 2 Slate. If I call this up, you'll see the elements that go into your slate. Project title, produced by your name here, the date you completed the project, the class and semester and the project number, COM265 Fall 2010 Project 2, and the runtime, not including ramps up and down. We don't have quite the runtime figured out yet. I'll show you that in a minute, so we'll come back to that and edit it in later. Now I'm going to shrink up this window so we can get back to our timeline. So from here in the viewer, again, I want 10 seconds of slate, so I'll check my duration. It's already set to 10, and I'll simply drag my slate, insert it through the canvas insert. There's no sound that accompanies a slate, so you'll see no sound is included. It's only text, which is perfectly fine. Finally, we need one more slug of black. Almost done. The last thing to complete our ramp up is to insert the fade from black, the video transition. We use a simple cross dissolve, most common fade dissolve transition, and I will place it there, centered. Play to check it. Looks good. You can change the length of that cross dissolve if you like. It doesn't need to be too long or too short, but find something that suits your taste. At the end of the production, simpler still, we simply need to find video generators again, grab a slug, 10-second duration. Now I see my playhead is not here. I could advance my playhead so that it is in the right place. Or since it's at the end and it's easy enough to add a clip right to the end, I'll just drag it straight into the timeline. And I'll make sure that it's butted up clean against the back end of the production. 10-second slug inserted. We also need a transition here. Cross dissolve, centered, check it. Voila. Almost done. We have the pesky element of duration that we need to insert into our production slate. So I'm going to call up my slate and so that I can go back into it in just a minute. There are different ways to calculate the duration of your project. The easiest way is just to take your playhead all the way to the very end and then look here in the box at the far right. This is the runtime. Now the first digit is hours, and we know your project isn't more than an hour. It sets to 01 by default as a way to avoid confusing the computer. We know that our production is 1 minute, 47 seconds, and 20 frames. You can see if I move the playhead, that number changes to mark whatever point the playhead is at. So we want to set the playhead at the end. We have 1 minute, 47 seconds, and 20 frames. That's the total time. That's not the run time. The run time for the production is 147, and we're going to ignore the frames for the sake of simplicity with the slate. 147 is the total time. The run time is 147 minus 10 seconds for the slug. For the ramp down, minus 40 seconds for the ramp up. So we need to subtract a total of 50 seconds from that 147. Which will bring us to under a minute, of course, down to 57 seconds. So, with some simple math, I can go back into my slate. I'll go into Controls and open up the editor. And now I can say the runtime is 57 seconds. I will apply it. Check it here. And then just double check in the production down here in my timeline to make sure that it actually has changed in the right place too. Slate, color bar, slug, color bars, slate, slug, fade from black. Looks very good. And at the end, fade to black, and final slug. This is the ramp up and ramp down process. Not too difficult, but really important, useful information. I hope you have a little bit of fun with it. Oh, one last note, speaking of fun. The idea for the slate is not to be fancy or interesting. The slate is not your title page. It's nothing the audience will see. The point here is to be clear. So simple font, black background, white text, easily readable. That's what we're going for. Not a place for decoration or actually any interest whatsoever. So that's all I've got. Get cracking.